Well, I guess when you have momentum on your side, you want to capture it and continue it on. So let's dive into the Sophomore album from a trio of gents that I love when they work together. So let's dive in.
And now, anywhere the wind blows, anywhere the wind blows.
Sophomore, or I think it's Sophomore. I think there's an extra O in there, from Dervigelo, Morse, and Jennings, or as I'm going to call them moving forward, DMJ. DMJ is a kind of like a singer-songwriter, almost country folk trio from three very unlikely individuals, but when you think about it, it actually makes sense. So we have Nick D'Virgilio from Spock's Beard and Big Big Train coming in with Neil Morse from Spock's Beard and all of his solo projects and offshoots, and Ross Jennings from Haken. This is the second time that they've played together, and I believe this was actually their first time that they were able to record in the same location instead of just kind of trading things all back and forth, because the first album was done kind of at the peak of the lockdowns. So yeah, this allowed them to kind of work together. They came into the studio instead of like fully fleshed out ideas, with everybody kind of coming in and helping out flesh out the tracks. Most of the tracks on this one were kind of half developed, or at least they had an idea in mind, so that there's a little bit more collaboration. The main thing that I will say, because I wasn't necessarily a big fan of their first one, which was Troika, I believe was how you pronounce their debut album. I'm not a big fan of this style of music, if I'm being perfectly honest. Like, when I love very good harmonizations, I'm looking for bands like Yes, like Moon Safari, or like the Beatles, that have these 3 to 4 part harmonies that work in a very symphonic way style. I've never really been a big fan of like the Crosby, Stills and Nash, or the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, that feel a little bit more like singer-songwriter for the harmonies first, and then having the music be a conveyor for those harmonies. And there's nothing wrong with that style. It just feels as though the musicianship takes a back seat for that. And as much as I love DMJ, their lyrics don't quite have that same level of sophistication as, say, a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young would have. Now, that's not a knock against them. I mean, you're working with the legends in that sense. But when the lyrics are kind of the star performers on there, being a conveyor for the harmonizations, you really got to be able to knock it out of the park. And I just felt like that first album didn't quite have what I was looking for, you know, and there were only like maybe 1 or 2 tracks on that album that I felt I wanted to come back to. And this album is very much the same. I don't want to say it's same, but the musicianship is kind of at the same level. There is a little bit more of a crosswork and collaboration between the 3 boys on this one. There's a little bit more of like a sophistication on that sense. But much like the first one, there's very obvious one leader of each song that everybody else kind of helps elevate up within the harmonies in that sense. And the harmonies are the star performer, as it was on the first album. And they work very, very well together. They're very pleasant. They're very soothing. They're very intricate in that way. And I do enjoy that. But if I'm being perfectly honest, there's nothing on this album that I couldn't get from a Crosby, Stills, Nash or Young album in that sense. Like, if I want to listen to that, I'm going to listen to that. But I've never been one to go and seek out those tracks. So kind of take that as you will. I still have the same criticism that I had for that first record, which was that Nick and Neil seem to be the 2 big driving forces for this record in terms of songwriting and lyrics, which leaves Ross a little bit more to the wayside. And it's a little bit of a shame, because I feel as if Ross really did strut his stuff and prove himself very worthy of this style of music with his solo record of Shadow of My Future Self, which came out in 2021, where it was much more of a singer-songwriter. It was really showing his ability to craft and write these more intimate and much more personal kind of slice of life tracks. And outside of the one track on this album of Tiny Little Fires, which in my mind is the highlight for this album, I don't really feel his presence outside of those harmonies, you know, without his kind of third part harmony on most of these tracks. That's kind of my biggest criticism. If I'm going into the things that I love, I already talked about Tiny Little Fires, and I love a very strange time signature and a very approachable and fun styles. Like, I love how there's like this kid's xylophone that really is the root of this track that builds itself around it. And I really enjoyed that, like, this is what we decided to build a track around, and you can definitely feel this is a Ross Jennings track. And I really love the quirky, fun, happy styles of this, and it's one of the shorter tracks at 3.5 minutes, and I really wish that they kind of blossomed this or had more tracks like this in the runtime of this album. I still think if we want to talk about like the star performer on this, I still think it's Neil Morse. You know, his tracks like Right Where You Should Be and I'm Not Afraid kind of have that Neil Morse singer-songwriter approach that he's always been trying to channel since the very beginning of his career, that I don't think he's ever really succeeded as much as he has on this project. You know, like I love how intimate and almost juvenile Right Where You Should Be feels, as well as I'm Not Afraid. And I don't know, I'm Not Afraid reminds me of Innocence in Danger, where there was that I'm Not Afraid Suite part 1 and 2 on it, but it still kind of has this bounce to it, you know. And I love the fact that Nick DiVirgilio's presence on this track really does lift itself up, and it's reminding me of some of the more intimate moments that we would have for Big Big Train, you know. And so I like the fact that they're kind of blending those two styles together for something that's very fun. Now, that being said, yeah, the criticisms kind of keep coming. You know, Mama, which is kind of an ode to mothers everywhere, is a dud for me. You know, it's one that I'm like, oh boy, this does not sound all that great. Same with Walking on Water and Linger at the Edge of My Memory. They're kind of forgettable in the same way that half of the tracks from the first album are. And Anywhere the Wind Blows feels a little too corny for me. You know, there's definitely the heart that's found on it, but I don't know, it doesn't quite work in the same way that I don't know, it just reminds me way too much of Queen. And, you know, the Anywhere the Wind Blows is just, yeah. Anyway, this album at best is inoffensive. You know, if I'm going to wrap this all up, it feels like a nice kind of late afternoon album. It's one where you want to play something that won't offend or challenge anybody. And that's the best that I could say for it. It's not definitely an album that I will rush out to play. Like, I won't play this one by choice, which is not really something great to say. But I can see this album having its fans and having its, you know, place in the sun. But I don't know. For me, it's an improvement from their first album, but it doesn't really improve really anything outside of the boys just playing more music together. I will say that at least I can tell throughout the entire runtime of this album, everybody is enjoying themselves and they are loving the music that they're creating. So if they want to create another album like this, have at it. People will definitely eat it up. If I were to recommend this to myself, I would say skip it, just because this isn't my favorite style of music anyway. But there's enough to come back to that my final rating will be Sophomore from DiVirgilio, Morse, and Jennings is one that I would ultimately stream. Again, it's inoffensive, right? Like, I can't say stay away from this album because on paper, there's nothing to stay away from. It's just with so much music that has been released lately, there are other ways to spend your time. From me, you know, like if I was talking to myself, I'd be like, yeah, don't go to something that I know you're going to enjoy more. But that's what I've got for this one. On their third album, which I know that they're going to do, please let Ross have a little bit more time in the sun. Give him more than just one track, please. That's my main take home message, is let my boy Ross cook. Just let him cook. But that's going to be it for me for Sophomore from DMJ. What did you think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below, because that's all I got. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.